All right, welcome back to the randInt podcast. It is episode 21. We have crossed the magic 20 line.
Exactly.
Hooray! Clap, clap, clap.
Well done. We did it.
Yes.
So today we're gonna go and do an interview-sode, and today we have Ryan Begley. Chandra, why don't you introduce Ryan?
All right. So Ryan is someone that I've now known for a few years from Nebula Startup, but he is somebody who from Australia originally, and then did med school in the US, did some consulting work, and then came and joined us at Nebula back in Australia a few years back. So he's had a slightly different career path as well. Thought it'd be interesting to have a little bit of a chat with him.
All right, welcome, Ryan. Hooray!
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Canned laughter and also cheers here. I think two things before we continue is firstly, what is Nebula? Because we haven't exactly discussed this in the past. And like consulting work, and what does that mean? Because I think, got a fairly medical sort of group listening. Ryan, do you want to elaborate?
Yeah.
I mean, you ended up working for Nebula, so you've got probably the best working memory of it.
Yeah, well, Chan's probably is the best, can probably provide the best description of Nebula, but I'll give it a shot. Did it start as, it's already, I shouldn't be explaining it if I start with a question. I believe it started as...
That was a nebulous concept.
Well,
It was a very
I wasn't there for the naming, but I do believe, is that the origin
That
of the
was
name?
the origin.
We're like, better keep this nebulous so we've got some room to maneuver.
Yeah, so it was patient education software. How do we improve the patient experience? And I joined shortly after they raised money. I was in the US actually, and talking about random. I joined because my brother happened to see a Facebook post that was saying, looking for a medico that's also interested in video. And he just sent it to me. This sounds like something you're interested in, because I've done some video editing and creation. And then, yeah, and then I've known Chans and the Nebula team for probably 4 or 5 years now because of that, but a totally, random connection there. And then the consulting, it was one of the first things I did after medical school. And it's not, when most medical people talk about consulting, they're talking about the big firms, the BCG and McKinsey and things like that.
I don't think most medical people know what consulting is. I definitely did not.
If they've looked into consulting, I think in moments of...
What is consulting?
Yeah. In moments of desperation, the medical people that have looked at what their other options are have one of the first things that pops up will be consulting. And so these big companies that you at least have had a chance of hearing of, like BCG and things like that, bigger companies pay them to come in and give them advice. And then they move on to the next company and kind of give them the same advice, and it keeps going, and they work everyone to the bone and that sort of thing. So I didn't do that. I joined a much smaller boutique consulting firm. So there were a few international offices, but probably only maybe 20 people in the whole company. And it was a lot of nonprofit work, leadership development, organizational development, those kind of things.
What made you go from, like, first of all, you grew up in Australia. Why'd you move to the US for med school?
So I grew up here, but my dad got a job over there, and the family moved over when I was 15. So from zero, well, actually did a lot of moves before that as well. But so about half my life in Australia and then half in the US. So I did high school, university, and med school in the US, and intended to stay in the US, but ended up coming back.
Okay, so the other connection here is that I actually trained and went to med school with your brother.
Yeah.
And he's an anesthetist as well, and that's how we're connected. But how did John end up here and you ended up over there? Like, if the whole family moved?
Yeah, that was interesting. So he had just gotten into medical school when we left, when we were leaving to California. So He took a gap year and came over to California with us, but decided, understandably, to continue in Australia and continue medicine in Australia.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And in terms of, so you went through, finished everything, did med school, and then just ran the other way.
Yeah.
So what happened there? That seems to be like a, like, you know, if we're talking about randInt stuff and random, that seems to be like a obvious big flashing sign of something didn't go right there.
Yeah, it was interesting. And it was weird. I've been trying to think for the last several years of a nice, concise explanation for it. But truthfully, it was just not a good fit. And I kind of realized that slowly over time and was convinced more and more of that over time and started looking at different things, consulting, startups, things like that, probably halfway through med school. And then a huge decision is if you continue with residency or try something else. And yeah, at that point, I decided to try something else. So didn't continue with residency.
How far did you get? Like you finished, and is there an internship equivalent over there? Or
yeah, so in the US, it's typically undergrad, which is about 4 years, and you'll major in something like biology, and then med school, which is another 4. So I finished that, and then gets you the MD, and then you've got your residency years after that, and part of that is internship and those kind of things. But in the last 2 years of med school over there, you do have a decent amount, at least we did, patient responsibility. So we had our own patients, but obviously reported to someone with a license and they made the final call. Yeah.
fair enough.
Yeah.
Kind of curious, actually, because you must have heard what med school here is like as well.
Yeah.
How does it actually compare?
So I have to go, I've obviously got my experience, and then the rest I have to go off stories. It seems to be a lot more relaxed in Australia. It seems to be a lot more relaxed. So kind of almost in every sense of the word. So yeah.
Can you give us some examples of how it was not relaxed over there?
Well, residency, which I didn't do, that's where it starts to get really intense. Just, 80, 100-hour work weeks, that kind of thing. What I've seen about some people I know in med school in Australia is that during med school, and this could be very different depending on the school you're at, I don't know, but they don't really have any patient responsibilities. It's kind of like shadowing kind of thing. So that was very different. We had our a sub internship, which was basically an internship during medical school and that kind of thing. So just a whole different level of responsibility and intensity.
I'm sure people are also curious, which medical school did you go to?
So, which makes the story even funnier.
Okay.
because I did happen to get into, in the US, you have a lot of options, and I did happen to get into my dream school, the one I wanted to go to, which was the Mayo Clinic.
Oh,
and that
wow.
was, yeah, and that was the one
Claps and cheers again.
Yeah. Yeah, well, not if you didn't do anything with it. So
no, it was the one you wanted. So
it was. No, it was amazing. It was amazing to get in, to work that hard, and it pay off. And the people there are really. It's not underrated. The people there are really amazing. They really care about patients. It's just a whole different experience. So yeah, that's where I went. And I didn't think I had, when I started the process of I'm going to try and do medicine, I didn't think I had a chance at a place like that at all. So yeah, it was amazing.
Well, you said that, fairly early on, you realized that it was not going to be a good fit.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you choose medicine to begin with? Was it like you come from a fairly medical family, but is that it? Or?
Yeah, well, I don't think it is, but you do have to wonder when you come from a very medical family, how much that influences it. When I became really interested in medical school, well, medicine in general, was in high school, and a talk from a guy from Doctors Without Borders, and and the work he was doing, and I really wanted to do work like that. So that's really what I was interested in. And again, talking how things are random and things come and go, that sort of, I think as I didn't like the work of medicine, that sort of faded. But in the last couple of years, I've kind of felt that desire come back, and I'm looking at other ways that I can get involved in global health and those sort of issues. So, yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And do
Do
you
you think
think
that's
that
something that might draw you back into clinical work, or do you think there's anything that would ever sort of drag you back into clinical work?
I think at this point, I can probably be of much more use not going back into clinical work, just because it would be such a long road to go back. And there are so many opportunities and companies and other organizations doing really important things. So it's pretty unlikely I'd go back into clinical work.
That makes sense. You feel like
Yeah, just because, I can just see so many opportunities to help where I don't need to go back to clinical work.
do you think
So, yeah.
if you hadn't gone to Mayo Clinic, like let's say for whatever reason you didn't have your tier 1 choice, like it got taken off, and like, I mean, I'm assuming like Mayo Clinic and the Stanfords and whatnot, they're the more intense version of things, right? Like I don't know, I have no idea if Texas has a med school, but let's say Texas, and I'm sure they've got one, but let's just assume
got a
that
few.
it's more relaxed, right?
Well, they've got some intense ones. I think Wash U is in Texas, and that's like a crazy one.
Yeah, look, I know nothing about medical school, but let's just assume that you went for a slightly more relaxed version of things, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that would have influenced your decision, or you think it wasn't the intensity of the training program over there? It was just, regardless of what it was, it wasn't quite the 100-hour work weeks and all that mishmash. It's just medicine wasn't for you.
Yeah, I think it just wasn't for me. Mayo's different in that if you want the intense environment, you can absolutely go and get that and find that. But it's also, they really take care of you. So I didn't have the, if you're familiar with the book House of God, I didn't have the House of God experience, which people probably do at Johns Hopkins, which I think that's where that book was based off. So yeah, Mayo really did care about us as students and really did care about us. And, and if you've got some friends in the upper year levels, they can help you kind of plan your schedule so you're not completely, destroying yourself.
Oh, that was really useful. Like where I did internship, my very first rotation was in ED, and my second week was on nights, and I was the only person in the hospital as an intern managing ED traumas, strokes, everything on the wards, and we had a cancer wing as well, out in the country with no registrars, no supervision, and GP staffing the floor for consult advice.
Yeah, that's stressful. Yeah.
Then again, on the flip side, I remember in med school, like the best advice I got from someone senior was, enjoy med school, because it might be the last time for a while that you get. And so, yeah, like it was really true. It's like, oh, hey, it's a really nice sunny day outside today. Like, this is Melbourne. There's not that many of them.
Yeah.
Better make use of it. I'm going to the park. And I'm like, zero regrets of that.
Overall, though, do you reckon you regret your decision to go to med school, or it was an experience that you had to have before you go, yeah, look, I had to go down that path before I course corrected?
I go back and forth on those kind of questions. I think it was probably a really worthwhile thing to do. I think it taught me so many things. Some of just the main lessons that come up is if you work really hard for something, you can achieve it, even though it might seem impossible. And then during med school, just the breadth of experience it gives you, both kind of academic knowledge, but interpersonal skills. You do get so many lessons from doing medicine. So
yeah,
I don't regret it, but if I went back, I might make a different choice.
Well, okay, so what would that was going to be my follow-up.
I don't know either.
Because you say, had you developed your interest in where you are now back then, or did that come through med school? Like, does that make sense?
Well, so now that in the last couple of years, I'm looking again at global health and those kind of issues, obviously a medical degree is really helpful. So I think those interests can maybe disappear in times of more stress and uncertainty, but then come back out when you're more, in a flow state and achieving things. So I definitely, that interest I think has kind of consistently been there. Another interest I've had for a long time is video production and film. And I was looking at film schools at the time of when I applied to med school around that time. And I guess I'm glad I didn't. And I've got friends in the LA area, and I've been working on some things with them, some screenplays and things like that. So you can always find a way to dabble in those kind of things. So yeah.
Well, we were going to talk about some other stuff first, but let's pull this thread about the video stuff a little bit more.
Yeah.
Like, how did you initially get interested in that? Like, where did it come about?
Yeah, I think two things that I've always been interested in, and that I can't even think of the moment it started, just even since I was a child, was the global health kind of issues that I mentioned. And I can think back to when I was probably 10 and talking about those kind of issues.
Wow. Okay.
You know, yeah. So where does that come from? At that point, I don't, you know, I don't know.
The World
And-
Vision ads all over
Yeah,
TV?
yeah, just seeing a ton of ads or something.
Equitable for all.
What was that?
Equitable lollies for all kids.
Yeah, yeah. So that's kind of always been an interest, and I think video has too. I can think back to being a really young kid, and actually, that's really funny you say ad, because watching ads, because the memory I can have, probably 10 or younger, was watching a TV commercial and thinking like, that's so interesting how they made that, and I wonder how they did this, and I wonder. It was an old, I remember the ad, it was an old Bunnings ad, and you know, they had the voiceover. I can't remember what they said. But watching that and thinking, that's interesting. Like, I wonder how they, you know, got the voiceover and animated it. So both of those interests have gone back a long way.
And just for context, we're old people. This is like before vlogging was a thing and
Yeah.
YouTube was a thing.
No,
YouTube
I
didn't
wasn't
exist.
brainwashed by the Paul brothers. Like, I wasn't just a narcissist.
That's how I get Lambos.
Like,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah, it
MTV
wasn't to
hadn't
sell
quite-
merch. Yeah, or NFTs.
Yeah, so all of these things didn't exist. This is like, you know, broadcast television only.
The
We didn't
TV
have,
that it was on
it
had
looks
one
like
of the,
Chandra's one.
it didn't have a yes, exactly. It looked like that. You know, there wasn't a remote. You have to get up and turn the thing. So yeah, I remember going back that far, thinking, and I mentioned to my mom at that point, I was like, how do you like get involved in this kind of thing? You know, so.
Do you remember the first time you sort of mucked around with video stuff yourself?
Let me think. There's a lot of overlap for me with video and performance, and so drama in high school kind of had a similar feel of how do you create something interesting and entertaining. And then specifically with video, there was a class called digital video that I took when I was about 16 in the US, and I found that really interesting. Yeah.
Do you think with video, what's the big draw for it? Is it the technical aspects of it, the performing in front of it, or like the more directorship, crafting a story based on like, you know, the raw material and slicing it? Like, I almost call it curation. Like, what element of it draws you? Like, because you're very passionate about it.
Yeah. I think to answer it kind of backwards, the technical part is not what it's about. And for me, that's the real effort, where I've got to learn that stuff to achieve the end goal. That's the painful stuff. And everything else is interesting. So coming up with an idea, how to make that entertaining. Nebula has made a lot of medical videos. So if it's medical, what kind of messaging do we come up with, and what do we sacrifice so that our messaging is really clear? And I've always really liked entertainment, and that's another thing I dabble in. Just doing some improv and things like that. And so that aspect as well.
So it sounds like for you, it's more the storytelling, and the videography is the kind of medium that you like to use.
Yeah.
For example, I'm like, I do photography now, dabble in videos. I better work out, how do you tell a story with this? Whereas it sounds like for you, it's the other way. Is that right?
Yeah. And then on the technical side, getting into the editing, I really like, which is kind of surprising to me, because I don't like the technical side of, you know, choosing shutter speeds and lenses and things like that. But the editing I really get into, and that can be, you know, I can be doing some editing if it's something I like, and, you know, you look at the clock and 6 hours have passed and you've just been obsessing over like, how do I make this joke hit the most? Like, you know, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Is it so the cutting and sequencing part of that editing that you enjoy?
It depends, I guess, because don't get me wrong, sometimes making a video can be very boring if it's a 10-minute purely informational. I'm not going to call anyone out. So it can definitely, like anything, it can get boring pretty quick. So the parts of it I like are, the best times are when you've got some footage and you're not sure if it's any good at all, but then in editing, it ends up being so much better than you thought it could have been. And it's purely by trial and error and moving things around and making use of all the different takes you've got and angles and things like that. And sometimes you come up with something that was so much better than what was in your head. And it's very surprising and satisfying.
Do you have like a favorite example of something you've created? Like we'll put it in the show notes or whatnot, just because... I probably don't. All the comedy type of things I've kept private, and that they were, for classes and things like that. And I don't think there are any, up online. All right. Yeah. Anything specific that's inspired you? Because like, I think for context, like, you've clearly got this entire, like this whole passion with video, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure if people are listening and are interested, they'd want to know what sort of stuff do you actually find like, interesting / inspiring. Like maybe if you have any, like afterwards, just send us a couple of links and we'll drop it into the show notes. So that
yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll think of it and we'll put something in there. Yeah. I've been reading a lot about screenwriting, and I'll take a screenplay and put it on my laptop in front of me and watch the movie and read the screenplay as watching the movie. And that teaches you a lot about the storytelling and how things piece together. And this has come highly recommended since it's within reach. And so this is, if you've seen the movie Get Out, for example. So this is very different than the kind of stuff I make, but it's an annotated screenplay. And that's one way to definitely learn a lot, because you've got his notes on why he made certain choices and things like that.
And that's the horror-ish film, right?
Screenwriting, sorry?
Sorry?
What is screenwriting exactly?
Film writing a script, writing a screenplay.
Is that sort of like the, what people do in terms of moving across the screen, or is it just what they say?
It's almost everything. You obviously don't cover everything, so it definitely includes what they say, and it will include details of the shot most of the time, but you also have to leave room for the director to do their thing. Okay, but so if you were to read the screenplay, you get a really good idea of what the movie ends up looking like. Nothing will be a surprise in the movie.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
So, Ryan, what are you up to at the moment? Like, we've covered kind of like your journey through medical school, then going hard left into consulting, into startups. Now you seem like you've got a bit of video stuff. You're involved in startup.
Well, so perhaps the professional path is probably a bit more clear, but the hobbies like screenwriting. So I am working on a couple movies with a friend who's out in LA, and hopefully something will come of those. We worked on one together that did make it into theaters, so that's really exciting.
Which one was that?
But I don't know if I can say which one, because
so secretive.
Hollywood's very complicated.
All right, okay.
And I kind of, again, I guess to keep the random theme going, I just say, if there's an opportunity that's interesting at all, I'll go, I'll help out with that. And I didn't want any sort of agreements or anything written, because who am I helping write from like Melbourne, Australia, Medico. And so I helped edit it, and it was a great opportunity and made some relationships, but I'm not credited on there. So,
well, it's interesting.
But neither are other people who worked on it. So,
so the thing is, like, I was watching Shang-Chi, the latest Marvel film recently, and if you watch to the end of the credits, a lot of movies have like Victoria and Film Victoria come up over and over again.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
There's actually a decent amount happening here in the Gold Coast. It seems to be fairly, like, it's not as isolated as I thought we were.
No, that's true. They do a lot of work to stay present in film.
And in your professional area, like, what are you up to at the moment?
So Nebula is still going. We're not as focused on the patient engagement side of things, but we've got a pretty large home oximetry project going. That started off as a grant-funded project, and now we're just seeing if we can grow that into something. There's always a couple other ideas that we're talking about, but those are all idea stage. And then for me, I'm at a pivot sort of point, and I'm thinking what I do next career-wise, and it won't be making screenplays full time. So
Nothing wrong with that.
yeah, well, I'm happy to do it if someone wants to pay me to do it. But
Well, I mean,
I
you're
don't
already
do-
uncredited ghostwriter level. You know?
yeah. So no, so I'm thinking, how do I use the skills I've accumulated since med school, which have been more business-wise?
Do you have like a blue sky vision of where say +5 or 10 years would look like? Like, what would be the ideal Ryan Begley next 5 years?
Yeah, I don't really, and I think for me, what works better is finding the thing that I'm most interested in next.
A true randInt person. We love it.
And I think I got that from, I think it was this book Range that I read recently, and that was the author's argument. Yeah, Chance and I talked about that a bit.
It's a good book.
Yeah, and that was, you should put that in the show notes. That's a good
What's
one.
it called? Range.
Range, yeah.
By
I can Google it.
No, all good. I'll put it in.
I did the audiobook, so you don't have the cover in front of you, so I don't know the author's name.
All good.
But he really makes that argument that a lot of people's lives, including someone like Steve Jobs, they just did what was the most interesting thing in front of them next. And in hindsight, it looks like a well-planned out career. And I do think that really works for me. So I'm trying to find an interesting, reasonable opportunity.
Is this the one? Range, Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World by David Epstein?
Yeah, that's
okay,
the one.
Cool. All right.
And there's a pretty good TED Talk version of it that's like 20 minutes if you don't want to commit to the whole book.
Okay.
I think probably really good for people in medicine to read, because it's kind of the opposite of medicine, where at Mayo, you're not just a specialist, you're a subspecialist, and then you're a subspecialist. And you're rewarded for that, socially. So it's kind of the opposite of that argument.
Definitely. And I think sort of one of the other things that I came across from that book was the fact that often it's that sort of combination of a multiple different skill sets, which is the uncommon thing, which will enable you to do certain projects differently or better, and sort of open up a different set of opportunities rather than being a subspecialist in one thing. Do you have, a few areas that you think you'd like to incorporate?
Yeah, so I think where I'll go next is kind of what makes more sense in terms of a medical degree. Pharma sort of world, global health kind of world. But the time that I haven't been dedicated to, pure medicine, I think will be extremely helpful. I feel like that's where I've learned, in many ways, learned much more than med school, just kind of getting out there and just trying different things. What else did you say in your question? I don't remember what else you said.
No, I was just wondering what sort of areas you think that you would like to tie together, not knowing, what it might be, but what sort of, pieces of things that you've picked up along the way that you'd like to combine.
Yeah, so I think the lessons, I can think of the really important lessons that I've learned in each of these experiences: consulting, startup, I did some teaching. I can think of really important lessons along the way that will come into whatever.
Any examples?
Probably lots of examples.
Top 3.
So in the startup type of world, it's almost the opposite of medicine, where medicine's very risk averse, and you try and do things as much as you can perfectly every time. But in startups, you definitely want much more of a bias to action. You've got to be comfortable with failing. Medicine, failing can often be really bad, so you try not to fail, because then you're at an M&M conference. Yeah. So that's probably the biggest one from startups. From the consulting time, I had the opportunity to meet with people doing a lot of amazing different things, and you'd learn that these are just normal people. They're not, most of the time, they don't have anything that's, really special, and it kind of maybe takes the edge off imposter syndrome. So you know that you can just give something a shot later and walk into the room, and you don't need to worry about being an imposter because everyone else has that same worry. Yeah, those are probably the main lessons that I think of.
So like, it's a very varied career that you've had so far.
Yeah.
Like, if you had to pick sort of 3 highlights, what would they be? Like, so far, so Ryan Begley right now, looking back, and you can take it anywhere from like, primary school onwards if you like, or pick your age. But because it's so varied, I just find like you've done so many different things. I wouldn't be able to say this would be the highlight or this would be the focus, because it's kind of all interconnected with, you've had video, you've had startup, you've had medical, like Nebula was a medical video company. It's like which bit's the highlight,
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't really thought of that. I guess if I were to choose a big highlight, I'll clump these together.
Yeah,
was
absolutely.
getting into the med school that I wanted to but didn't even think was possible, and then also finishing despite the fact that halfway through I didn't think it was for me. So being able to finish is an important skill, especially when you've got a couple of years ahead of you and you don't think it's for you. So that was a big one. Joining Nebula and trying all the different things we've done with Nebula has been a really big one, because for me, it was also the move back to Australia. So that brings in a whole other set of challenges where, although it is in a sense my home country, you do have to get used to the city you're in again and make new relationships. And being a tech video startup, it was a very different world than I'd worked in. So there were a lot of things to learn. So that was definitely a highlight. And I guess that almost brings us to now, really. Yeah.
Because I was gonna say, like, that's a pretty big move, right? Like, you basically, your brother sends you a Facebook message, and you pack your bags too. And I hitchhike it back. Like, I mean, yeah, it's a known environment, but it's still like you've left decades worth of history behind to chase an opportunity. Like, I think, the thing that you're mentioning before about a bias towards action, like that's probably the clearest example of going, oh yeah, it's kind of like just sensing like what you were saying before of just taking a leap of faith, if you like, and going, these seem like the right combinatorics to move forward, and you did it.
And I forgot until you'd mentioned that how quickly it happened, because from Facebook posts from John, my brother, saying, hey, check this out, to being in Australia was probably a month.
Wow.
So from check it out, it may have been less than a month. I might go back and try and work that out. I think it was
in the days of pre-quarantine.
We were also sort of, startup. So it's like, all right, we're going to hire. Let's hire now.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, let's just do it. So it was a big leap, but it also wasn't too crazy. I do have relatives here and that kind of thing. So I don't want as much credit as someone who moves around the world and doesn't know anyone there.
Do you miss the US?
Yeah, I definitely do. The main thing are the friends and network I have out there, but I also miss, there's just, so much happening out there. Just kind of, name an industry, and there's so many interesting things happening. There's obviously, they've got a lot of problems too they need to sort out. And if we're talking about medical things, healthcare is a huge issue over there. I don't know how many tens of millions of people still don't have healthcare, but it's obviously too many. So, but yeah, I do miss it. Yeah.
On that point, actually, just out of curiosity, do you remember any things that were particularly stand out in your mind as a difference between healthcare there and here? Could be good, could be bad.
Yeah, well, the biggest thing is just that there's there's some sort of socialized medicine. The very conservative people over there will tell you there's not, but there actually is socialized medicine. There's Medicare and Medicaid, and I think Massachusetts has socialized medicine. So there are versions over there, but in general, there isn't this medical safety net that you have here, which, that's definitely the biggest difference. But the US deserves credit for driving the world's innovation. All of the new drugs come out of there. And that probably is because there is so much upside to make money off these drugs. It costs, the last estimate I saw, it's always going up at 2.7 billion, I think it costs to make a drug.
Wow.
Yeah, so those investors need to make that back and then some.
Do you think it's generally like, if you had to pick you've lived in both societies extensively, right?
Yeah.
Far more than, Chandra in his time, or like I've lived in third world countries, but what would you say is like the biggest difference, like in mindset, between the US and Australia? Is it a risk thing? Is it just a general sense of capitalism thing? Like, you're probably one of the best people to answer that. Like, you've worked in varied fields with a big range. Like, what do you think the core things that are different are?
Yeah, and I've answered before, and then someone's always quick to bring up an example where I'm wrong. So
there's obviously
the
going
first
to
thing,
be.
but
This
very
is
legit
randInt, okay?
example. So like an
randomism.
example where you're like, oh, okay, well, you got me. So there are, you have to make huge generalizations, and Australia's big.
This is not a gotcha podcast. So
This is no, I don't.
This is a friendly zone. It's a friend zone.
Even the US, the culture is so different. It's almost like going through Europe with all the different countries in the US. Like, you can go from LA to, the South to the Midwest, and, they're just so different. But
this is to do with your experience. Like, I mean, you're allowed to generalize to your experience, and no one's gonna. Well, we're gonna edit it so that no one's allowed to call you out on it.
Yeah.
I mean, the comments. Well,
I think the things you were hinting at are right. The people over there are more willing to take risks. There's more of an entrepreneurial spirit. They don't care as much if you've failed, if you can explain why things didn't work. So more second chances. But over here, there's more of a sense of how do we take care of our community, which I think is an incredibly important thing. How do we take care of our poor and people who don't have the nicest health insurance and things like that? So those are some differences I've noticed.
How does the US reconcile, like, you were saying that, the Mayo Clinic, you kind of come out and the residency program is kind of like the intense 80, 100-hour weeks, right? So, I mean, wouldn't that, and it sounds like that's getting you into perfection mindset, but as you pointed out, like, half the drug innovations and medical innovations still come from there. Like, how does a nation balance this risk taking with this intense trend towards what I assume is perfectionism? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I'm not sure how the country reconciles it. I guess you just have a big enough country that there are some people focused on the risk taking, some people focused on the perfectionism. Yeah, I'm trying to think of if there's an example. As I think of the people I know who are really the perfectionists in medicine, yeah, they're not going off and taking some entrepreneurial chances. Yeah.
Is it like
one of the things that I noticed over there was the fact that there was, like you were saying, Ryan, there's such a variety. Each, state or city has its own different feel and subculture, almost in a sense. Did you find
definitely.
like some of the cities that you lived in, you noticed that, it is possible that, okay, this city will be a lot more risk taking, this one will be the safe one, etc.? Yeah,
definitely. You can go through. So I wasn't really in LA. For someone who knows LA, they'll get mad at me if I say that. So I was outside of LA, but as you go through LA, the areas are very different. And so in general, people know of it as kind of a left-wing place, and that's true, but there are some really conservative areas and that feel like you're in a completely different place when you're there. So I can totally imagine that, being the case.
Would this also be a good hypothesis, maybe, like, as in you said the country's big enough and it's got this range, like that's probably like the delta of 0 to 100. If you scaled that to Australia, like it's probably a much narrower range than what the US has. Like, would is it so that, you know, you've got the risk takers and you've got the perfectionists? The risk takers go and find something, then the perfectionists refine it. Is that like a actual pathway that happens, or like just my random theory from hearing what you said? Is that?
I think that's probably true. As I've seen how investment works for some of these companies, it does seem like that they'll be the more crazy risk takers getting the idea off the ground, and that as it progresses, you'll have people that are more conservative contribute to it. And then startups typically have a problem where the founder is the CEO, but it needs to change to another CEO, someone who's more management focused than blue sky thinking focus. So I think that's a fair assumption. Yeah.
And I suppose they've just got more capital to pour into it. Like, as in, if you compare it to here, it's kind of like you can have risky people and the refiners, if you like, but the glue that gels them together is probably not, like, as in both from a cultural and mindset point of view, it's probably just doesn't connect as frequently. Like, you know, like you have a brain, you have a body, but the nervous system probably doesn't connect together quite as much here as compared to there. Is that also fair to say?
I get that feeling from here, that there is that sort of problem, that there are a lot of people here that have these great aspirations and are trying to do amazing things, but just can't quite find the connections here to make it happen. I did get that feeling, yeah.
And do you think it's likely to change at all, or it's like in your 5 years back, have you noticed a change?
I guess I don't know. There's been a lot of focus and a lot of talk of money that the government puts into innovation and things like that. But then, yeah, it's hard to imagine that changing. Chance might even have a better perspective on if he thinks, if he agrees with me, and then does he think things are moving in the right direction? Or
one of the things I suppose I'd be curious to see what you think is, I think one of the reasons that the US worked there for early stage startups is the fact that there's a lot of success stories, and so it's not an unknown entity there. For example, in Australia and WA, people gladly throw money into, you know, a random tiny little company that's, you know, going fossicking in the ground for some, you know, looking for minerals.
yeah,
No shortage of capital there. People gladly take a punt on that. But it's because there's plenty of success stories here off that. So I suppose one thing I've always wondered is, how do you bring or bridge some of the success and bring some of that experience back, so that then it becomes, oh yeah, it's just another thing that we do. It's the same as, you know, throwing some money into random tiny mining companies. We'll throw some random money into tech companies now.
Yeah, that is a good point. I think it's a cultural thing about Australia that I've found weird, is that someone can get their start here and become really successful internationally, just naturally, organically. As the company grows, they end up moving to the US and they're a huge success, and that Australia, or the powers that be, kind of don't want to welcome them back. And I've seen quite a few examples of that. Yeah, some big executive in the US who's Australian won't be welcomed back into Australia. I mean, they're not shunned, but they're not added into societies and things like that when they're shoo-in. So I think that is something Australia, needs to work on.
Like, what, it generally goes, yeah, you know what, you're smart, get out of here. Like
I
an
think
extreme version of tall poppy syndrome, if you like.
Yeah, it's interesting. And then I know people that have been trying to get people to come back, specifically doing this thing, someone who's been successful, let's say in the US, to bring them back, and then they just can't get them, you know, a salary that's close to what they could be making in the US. You know, I've commonly heard that the salary would be, let's say, a third of what they'd be making over there. So that's obviously a problem too.
Yeah, fair enough.
But yeah, harder problem to solve. Just need a bunch of money to solve that problem.
All
But
right.
we have beaches instead.
Yeah.
And lockdowns.
Yeah, that will be interesting. So talking to my American friends, they view Australia, my very conservative American friends, they view Australia as the epitome of like a country that has overreacted to COVID. So it will be interesting to hear how their perspective has changed. And maybe it is a lot harder to get people to come back here now.
Yeah. Okay. we're going to do a sort of a hard right onto some more random
Do it.
topics.
Okay.
We're kind of been talking about more the career side of things. Since you are into tech and everything, what would you say has been your favorite gadget in like the last 6 months? Like some tech, it could be a service, it could be a gadget that you either enjoyed the most, look forward to the most, or found surprisingly useful.
Does it need to be like it's come out in the last 6 months, like it's cutting edge?
No, it can be anything. Like for example, yeah, like for example, like my strange one has been this microphone is just strangely good, but the other thing is like I got a knockoff Theragun massager thing. I had this weird neck pain and kept on hearing about it, and I got this like $50 thing from JV. Just turned it on. 5 minutes later, neck pain that's been bothering me for 3 days gone. Now I'm like a firm believer. Need to buy like the proper ultra elite version, right?
That's good.
I don't know if it was just placebo or not, but that's my random purchase. Like anything like that come to mind?
I've got a few. I think I might be stealing this from the first podcast episode, but an electric toothbrush is something I wish I'd done a long time ago. And I think I remember Chan saying something that he never uses it for 2 minutes or something like that from the first podcast.
That's a lot of minutes.
I mean, it does. You need to just stand there for 2 minutes. Like
a lot of it, active.
It does the work.
So what's the tech entrepreneur's electric toothbrush of choice? We need the nitty gritty now.
I did get one that a dentist recommended. It was an Oral-B something or other. And I remember the features that he loved was that it tells you if you're pushing too hard. But I don't think that's that helpful because you have to push it pretty hard for it to give you that buzz, to let you know.
Maybe you weren't pushing hard enough.
Maybe this whole time. That's what it's telling me.
I can maybe back off a bit.
It could be telling me that. So that's what he loved. And then I think just the 2-minute aspect, but they've all got to have that, I would think. And then another tech gadget that's been a game changer. I've got one glued to my desk. I need to find one that's not glued. It's just a little rubber thing to hold my headphone cable in place. But I put that on the other week and that's been great.
Is it an Apple branded one? Because
it's not. Do they make them? They probably do.
I mean, they make a $15 or $20 polishing cloth.
I saw that. That is crazy.
What can I say? It just works, all right.
Yeah, so not too tech groundbreaking stuff. I don't think I'm looking around at other things. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's probably the tech breakthroughs I've enjoyed the most.
It's actually interesting. So I was watching this, Noah Kagan, who's like a YouTube / marketer in the US. Yeah. And he's very into the tech scene, and Tim Ferriss and all these guys. And like, you look at their sort of tech recommendations, their actual, like what you think is like, they're not upgrading to the latest laptop. They're not getting the new phones. They're like, that'll be fine. They find these little fringe things like, like the Oura Ring was one of their recommendations. But they don't actually upgrade the core stuff that often.
Yeah, I found myself doing that more. Like this little gadget that you literally just clip your headphones in, this really like saved a big problem for me. So funny. It's funny because I was always, my hands were getting caught typing. The Oura Ring, I've been meaning to do that. One I want to buy is I think it's called like a chili pad or something, like you put it on the bed and it cools the...
This close to getting it. I'm about to change my bed, but that is literally the next purchase.
I've got all sorts of sleep issues, so I'm hoping that can solve them.
I have like 0 sleep issues, but I want it to be even better.
If you can change the sleep tracking metrics, there you go. It's worth it.
There you go. So yeah, I think it's called Chili Pad or something like that.
Yeah, it is. And it's launched in Australia recently.
That'll be good.
The official one. So there's, I think...
Yeah, because last time I looked at it, it was stupidly expensive to get one from the US and use a transformer. And
so it's still
expensive, right?
In the realm of still not as stupidly, like, I mean, when I last looked, which was about 4 or 5 years ago, it was going to be in the range of 3 to 5K for a decently sized bed and everything else, plus shipping, because these are heavy units. Last week when I looked, it was down to sub 2K for
so still a lot. Okay.
Well, I think there's also a new model coming out that's cheaper again. So because I think right now the prices are hiked because of the whole supply chain issue thing. So like,
Yeah.
as
And
in
it takes
it's probably
6 months
gonna
to get to you. Yeah.
yeah. So I think it's gonna get to like the 1K sort of a
Yeah.
level soonish. Like still expensive, but for what it
Yeah,
used
it's a
to
lot.
be.
I'm not sure I'll do that, but I would like one. Yeah. Or I want to also try a weighted blanket because I want to see. I feel like that I would like that.
I can genuinely say from growing up in Bangladesh where there is no lightweight material, like, and basically in winter it's still like 20 something degrees, but you know, people go nuts. It's like when you go to Queensland and people are wearing a jumper on a 22-degree day, you're like, what? It's like shorts weather, you know? So Bangladesh, same thing, but everything was heavy. And like one of my favorite memories is like lying next to my grandma and it's like this heavy, almost suffocatingly heavy blanket, but it just feels like a hug.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Like, I'm allowed to feel cozy, you know?
Yeah.
I'll take technology that makes me feel cozy.
I feel like it's just an old woolen blanket remarketed.
It might be. It might be it. That's true. I do need to just take a trip to Target first to make sure.
I don't
Not
think
just
you have to
getting-
buy it off the Instagram ad. I'm just saying.
Yeah, that's a good point. I might just be falling for the Facebook ad. So
They are
Yeah.
surprisingly effective.
yeah.
One more random question for you, since you are someone who's traveled around a little bit.
Mm.
You have a favorite city that you've been to?
Hmm.
And it could be different cities for different things. So for example, for me, I love Perth as a outdoor town. If I ever wanted somewhere where I just wanted to hang out outside, Perth, 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. That was actually one of the first ones I was thinking of, kind of scrolling through the cities. Perth would be one for that same reason. And it was one that when I landed there, and granted I was young, so I was probably 13, we moved to Perth. We moved a lot. I was really surprised how pretty it was. And then as the days and weeks and months go on, you're like, oh, it's just always this pretty, you know, like the weather doesn't get bad, you know. So that's like, yeah, a vacation spot, but a major city there. So that's an amazing one. There are so many cool little places in California. You know, you can just stop at so many places and just see different things. So I'm not even sure which ones to choose there, but driving up and down California.
Have you got a favorite? There's got to be a few that you think are like the stellar highlights for you.
Yeah, I'm thinking of, I really like San Diego. I guess it's mainly beach towns, the ones I really like. I really like Santa Barbara. My brother went to university there. And so seeing Santa Barbara is really nice.
Interesting you say San Diego, because I remember looking at the towns that have the least number or the most number of sunny days with the coldest weather average. San Diego
Is that one of them? No.
There's actually a Microsoft data calculator for this where you can put in, like, you can basically set temperature ranges and it'll try and find you like the zone which has the most. So the other one is Esperance in Perth, in WA, sorry.
So that's most sunny days, but cold.
Well, colder than like say 30 degrees. It was like the band was like 20 to 26 degrees.
Because the other place I'd heard that's like that is in Colorado. I think it was Denver, which is known to be like the most, I think that has the most sunny days year round, but obviously cold and snowy. And in terms of amazing cities, I loved driving through Colorado, and they're just all those, I'm not a skier or a snowboarder or anything, but just all those little towns are so nice, like Breckenridge and Aspen and things. You can just do that drive, and every town is so cool. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So overall, in the very varied career that you've had, what would be like 1 to 2 pieces of advice you'd give to, assuming that most of the people listening are medical, or they might not be, like we don't actually have very good podcast stats. But if you had to give someone advice, like actually that's why not make it one medical, one non-medical, what would it be? Like, what would you say? You've got the variety to actually have something to say that's probably going to be atypical for most people.
I think for medical, and you know, both of these will probably apply to both, but for medical, to remember how fortunate you are to be in that position, that people are trusting you to provide their healthcare, and it's an extraordinary position to be in, and you get paid well for it, and all of those things. Just because I saw through medicine, understandably, people get more cynical, and then when it comes time to choose their career, they may have been interested in, you know, peds at the beginning, and then they go for a lifestyle specialty at the end, which I completely understand. But just to remember, you know, what an honor it is to be able to provide people's healthcare there, and as much as you can, fight the cynical nature of it. And then for people in general, but probably also for medical people, I think, and let's hope this theory plays out, just try as many things as you can. If you're interested, that's even better. So just keep trying things, because that just increases the chances of you finding that thing you're interested in, or there'll be some incredibly surprising connection with something you did 10 years ago that applies to what you're doing now. But if you just keep trying things and worry less about them fitting a perfect path, it'll pay off in the end.
True randInt advice right there.
Yeah.
It does remind me of a good old Steve Jobs quote as well, about connecting the dots backward in retrospect. But,
yeah, sounds good.
We'll leave that as well. Well, thanks for chatting to us and sharing your wisdom and your randomness.
Yeah.
So for everybody listening, make sure lots of likes, subscribes, and all that sort of jazz. And we'll have some show notes below with the books and gadgets that we talked about.
Any sort of social handles or websites or anything to contact you if they've found something interesting that they want to talk to you about?
I don't really have any like social network stuff going right now.
Pass it
like
through us. And,
I would say go through my secretaries, Raffy and Chandra.
So if you've got any questions or comments, podcasts at photosbyraffi.com for now, although we now officially have randint.com as the domain.
That's cool.
So we will be setting that up later. I think it just redirects to Anchor at the moment.
Yeah, currently that was the easiest thing, but it'll be there soon.
Yeah, but for now, if you have any questions or comments for Ryan, podcast at photosbyraffi.com, and also like all the social media stuff, like, subscribe, and comment, but don't turn on notifications because we don't like them. So we have not been encouraging anyone to press those buttons.
That's funny.
Yeah, well, anyway, it's been lovely to chat to you. It's
cool.
Been,
Thanks for having me.
Until next time, I suppose we call it a show.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks.